Welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Young-Kyo Kim. The United States government has broken its silence over the controversy surrounding South Korea's new law banning anti-Pyongyang leaflets. In a statement released to news media, the State Department did not directly use the word leaflets, but said it is critical for North Koreans to have access to fact-based information not controlled by the North Korean regime. Today we'll discuss these and more. Joining us is Robert Einhorn, Senior Fellow at Brookings Institution. Mr. Einhorn served as the U.S. State Department Special Advisor for Non-Proliferation and Arms Control in the Obama administration. Scott Snyder also joins us today. He's Director of the Program on U.S.-Korea Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. His book, South Korea at the Crossroads, examines the trajectory of South Korean foreign policy. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Young-Kyo.
Thank you.
First, Mr. Snyder, I'm sure you read the statement from the State Department. Does this statement from the State Department put Washington at odds with Seoul?
Well, I think that it really is a restatement of U.S. policy, and actually it's consistent with U.S. law under the North Korean Human Rights Act that the State Department, the U.S. government, has a commitment to try to increase information flow to North Korea. And the statement did not directly criticize the South Korean government's new law.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador Einhorn, does the outside information play any important role in the process of denuclearizing North Korea?
I don't think it plays much of a role. If outside information got to North Korean elites and publics, suggesting to them that too many resources had been devoted to nuclear weapons and not enough to their own welfare, maybe that would have an impact. But that's very, very unrealistic. The regime in North Korea isn't going to permit that kind of information to come to the attention of North Korean people. And in any event, that kind of information wouldn't compete with the kind of message that's been drilled into the heads of all North Koreans for many, many years, which is that North Korea needs a powerful nuclear deterrent to protect against hostile U.S. policies. So no, I don't see outside information having much of an impact.
Mr. Snyder, then why is the free flow of information into North Korea important?
Well, it's primarily important because North Korea, as a state, prizes political loyalty to Kim Jong-un above everything else, and this conflicts with freedom of expression in North Korea, a principle that is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I think the other aspect of this is that we know from North Korean defector testimony that North Koreans themselves really don't have an understanding of the concept of human rights, having been exposed only to monopolistic information control by the regime.
Mm-hmm. Some South Korean politicians responded to the criticism from the U.S. politicians by saying the U.S. is trying to interfere in South Korea's domestic affairs. Mr. Snyder, is this really an interference of the domestic affairs?
Well, I think that what U.S. congressmen have done is to express their concern about the restrictions that exist. But actually, that criticism reminds me of the sort of defense that authoritarian regimes have offered to try to prevent close examination of internal affairs. We saw South Korea in authoritarian days, in fact, offering official defenses of their human rights record by suggesting that these sorts of criticisms were interference in internal affairs. And so I think that's a little bit strange to hear that from democratic South Korea under an administration that came to power through the candlelight revolution and actually should prize and recognize the benefits of freedom of expression.
Mm-hmm. One more question for you, Mr. Snyder. The U.S. Congress has just passed a bill that includes a budget of about $10 million to be used for promoting human rights in North Korea. Do you think South Korea's new law could make a negative impact on executing the activities supported by this U.S. Congress?
Well, as a practical matter, I think that a lot of the projects funded by the U.S. government to try to get information into North Korea have used South Korea as a platform for pursuing those objectives. And so this law would make it more difficult for some of those activities to go forward, not all of them. And I think that the really critical distinction that probably would be good to see on the part of the South Korean government is a distinction between activities like leaflet launching near the border and other more general activities like information dissemination by radio and other means that do not involve presence near the DMZ.
Ambassador, this new South Korean law banning anti-North Korean leaflets has drawn the global attention. At a hearing in the UK Parliament, Michael Kirby, former chair of the United Nations Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in North Korea, said it is likely that those actions may come into conflict with the policies of the U.S. new administration. Ambassador Einhorn, is it really likely?
Well, the new law could clearly expose some differences between the Biden and Moon administrations on questions such as freedom of expression and human rights. And that wouldn't be very helpful. It's very important for there to be as little daylight as possible between the two governments. But a broader implication of this controversy, it seems to me, is that it could raise concerns among Americans that President Moon is so eager for North-South reconciliation that he will adopt positions that would be at variance of those of the Biden administration, including on such issues as the relationship between denuclearization and inter-Korean projects, as well as such matters as joint U.S. ROK military exercises, and that would be very unfortunate.
Mr. Snyder, what is your view on this? If indeed there is a difference in the view, how can the two governments resolve this?
Well, I'm pretty confident that the two governments will find a way to move forward, but I do think that this issue presents an obstacle actually for the Moon administration in pursuing its objective of convincing the Biden administration to support engagement with North Korea, because it means that there's going to be more time taken discussing this issue rather than strategies for engagement. And it also raises the political cost for a Biden administration to engage with North Korea, because there will be cautions and criticisms coming from Capitol Hill that will result from the way in which the Moon administration has tried to implement this law.
The new chair of the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee, Gregory Meeks, said U.S. President-elect Joe Biden will not send a love letter to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The Biden team has always made it clear that the meeting with Kim Jong-un is not likely if there's no foreseeable progress in denuclearization. So, Ambassador, can we assume that the symmetry between Biden and Kim Jong-un is not likely unless the North Korean regime takes some tangible steps in the denuclearization?
Given the nature of the North Korean regime, where all important decisions are made at the senior-most level, direct engagement with Kim Jong-un is going to be necessary at some point in the process. But President Trump, I think, made the mistake of believing that personal diplomacy and beautiful love letters could overcome major substantive differences between the countries. And the North believed that it could exploit President Trump's ego and his political needs. And they therefore wanted to deal directly with him personally, rather than engage at the working level. Now, I don't think President Biden will rule out meetings at the summit level, but I think, given his experience, he's likely to want to meet only if progress has been made, very substantial progress has been made at the working level, and if he believes, he has reason to believe, that involvement of the leaders would have a reasonable chance of resolving all remaining issues. In those circumstances, I think he would be prepared to engage with Kim Jong-un.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, South Korea's foreign ministry affiliated think tank predicted the incoming U.S. administration of Joe Biden could seek dialogue with North Korea next year. Ambassador, how do you see the possibility of the U.S. initiating the dialogue this coming year? Is this a wishful thinking from the South Korean side?
Maybe it is. We will see. The Biden team understands the nature of the North Korean threat, and they're concerned by that threat. They know that there's no military solution to the problem and that negotiations will be necessary to try to resolve it. But I don't think they're going to be anxious to rush into talks with the North Koreans. The Biden administration has other priorities, especially domestic, but also other foreign priorities. And in terms of foreign priorities, they're going to want to give priority to working closely with the South Korean government to restore South Korean confidence in U.S. security commitments, to ensure that that allied deterrence and defense capabilities are in good shape, and to develop a common negotiating approach to North Korea. All those things will have to take place, and the administration will take months to get its full team in place. So there's going to be time. The risk, of course, is that Kim Jong-un believes that he's being ignored. He may decide to engage in provocative actions to try to get the world's attention, like a nuclear test or a flight test of an ICBM range missile. That would be very unfortunate and could foreclose prospects for diplomacy. So to head off such provocations, I think it would be very useful for a Biden administration at a very early stage to state publicly that it looks forward to constructive engagement with the North Korean regime. It might also say it hopes to make parallel progress on goals such as denuclearization, U.S. DPRK normalization, and peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. Now, these goals are an echo of what was contained in the Trump-Kim Singapore summit joint statement. I think it might be helpful for the Biden administration to put out a message like this, because first of all, it would be welcomed by Kim Jong-un, because it would show that the Biden administration is not ignoring what he had managed to succeed. And it might also give the Biden administration's North Korea policy some political cover with American Republicans.
Mm-hmm. And South Korea had a shuffle of some diplomatic positions. Most distinctively, the chief nuclear envoy was replaced. Do Gyu-duk, a career diplomat serving as presidential secretary for peace planning, was named to replace Lee Do-hun as the special representative for Korea Peninsula peace and security affairs. How do you interpret this move, Mr. Snyder?
Well, I think this is a normal diplomatic transition. It comes at a moment of transition in the United States. Mr. No has been following these issues from the Blue House and is well acquainted with the Moon administration's approach. And now there's a new team coming in on the U.S. side. And so I think that it is a natural opportunity for transition within the normal order of South Korea's bureaucratic needs.
If I could just add to that.
Sure.
Lee Do-hun is a very, very skillful diplomat, and I hope he gets a very good onward assignment. But Lee Do-hun had a very good working relationship with Steve Biegun, the U.S. envoy in North Korea, later became, in addition, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State. And even though probably Ambassador Lee would have moved on sooner in accordance with normal rotation, they kept him on. The MOFA kept him on because he was so useful in working with Mr. Biegun to coordinate U.S. and ROK policies. So now with the new U.S. administration, I think it's only natural that there would be a new South Korean envoy. I just hope that before long, his counterpart will be named so they could begin the critical work ahead.
And my last question today is about North Korea's Premier Kim Duk-hoon's recent visit to the Mount Kumgang region. He called for building a modern and all-inclusive international tourist area on their own way. Why do you think this visit was made when the country is struggling with the economy amid the sanctions and the pandemic? Mr. Snyder first.
Well, if we go back to where the Pyongyang Declaration left off in September of 2018, I think it left off with an anticipation on the North Korean side that there would be some form of resumption of inter-Korean economic exchange. And so I think that the North Koreans are providing a not so subtle hint that they would like to see South Korea come in at this time, really in the role not of intermediary that South Korea has played previously, but rather as either a patron for North Korea or an agent to try to convince the Biden administration to ease off on restrictions of economic flows into North Korea.
Mm-hmm. And Ambassador, what was your take on this?
Yeah, look, I think it's very important that the Biden and Moon administrations try to develop a common approach toward inter-Korean projects and the relationship of those projects toward progress in denuclearization. I think it's very, very important. President Moon has clearly been very frustrated that the stalemate on denuclearization has, in effect, well, it's more than impeded. It has blocked progress on inter-Korean projects that are so dear to him. Now, clearly there has to be some relationship between the two, and inter-Korean cooperation can't get too far ahead of progress on the nuclear issue. But I think it would be good for the Biden administration to show some flexibility here and to permit some inter-Korean projects to go forward, even before this early major progress in denuclearization. Now that could involve some exceptions to existing sanctions, but I think in a number of areas it would be very good for the Biden administration to support those exceptions to ensure strong support between the United States and South Korea on North Korea policy.
Well, we now have less than a month until the new U.S. administration takes off. And up to now, North Korea has remained silent on President-elect Joe Biden. Only the time will tell how North Korea will make the first move. Ambassador Einhorn, Mr. Snyder, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. The coronavirus pandemic made the year 2020 a tough and challenging year for every one of us. But let's get our hopes up that the new year will be different. Please keep staying safe and strong. And we'll see you in year 2021.